After watching videos about Russian roulette on social media, she says Ian tried it.
How did a 16-year-old get a revolver?
Nathaniel admitted to playing a Russian roulette style game.
Because like many stories, this one is not all that it seemed, and there was actually more than what the news was presenting.
My daughter, it's the best thing that ever happened to me, and she's gone, so.
Today we have a very dark video. We're gonna get right into today's video right after a word from our sponsor. I haven't always been a YouTuber. I did have a 9-to-5 before this. I worked in an office. I was an executive assistant. And let me tell you, finding food to eat every day for lunch when you're in between meetings and you're so busy was such a challenge. It was so hard to not give into temptation and spend a ton of money on unhealthy takeout with my coworkers every day. It would have been a dream come true to have a fresh meal that I could have just popped in the microwave every day at work. If you work at an office or have a 9-to-5, I would highly recommend trying out Factor, which is today's sponsor. Even though I'm a YouTuber now, I still use Factor because I hate cooking. And with Factor, you get fresh, never frozen, dietitian approved meals delivered in a box right to your door. And there's no grocery shopping involved. There's no prep. There's no chopping. And there's no cleanup whatsoever. They're flexible. You can skip your box if you don't need it that week, or you can just put more or less meals in your box on any given week. Like, the benefits go on and on. Today, I'm eating the Baja shrimp. I tried their Baja shrimp. It had cauliflower rice, broccoli, and a jalapeno lime cream with it. It was absolutely delicious. I've also been really into their smoothies. As I'm filming today, I'm actually sipping on this one. This is their tropical citrus smoothie. It's super good. I want you all to just take a moment and imagine what you would do with all of your free extra time this summer if you had Factor. Head to factor75.com or click the link right below this video at the top of the description and use the code 50 HannahTheHorrible for 50% off your first box and free shipping. That's code 50 HannahTheHorrible at factor75.com for 50% off and free shipping on your first box. Thank you again to Factor for sponsoring today's video, but also keeping my tummy full, and let's get into it. So as you guys have figured out by now, this video is about Russian roulette. Now, before we get into it, I just want to reiterate that if you are having bad thoughts right now, you probably don't want to watch this video because it might be triggering. If you are having a hard time right now, click off this video and remember that there are crisis support lines that are anonymous that you can text or call, probably an arm's length away on your phone. That being said, for those of you where this is a safe video for you to watch, please know that unfortunately I have to be a little bit censored because of YouTube, so I am going to avoid the word GUN as much as possible and have to use a few code words, which I will put on the screen in a censored version so you still know what I'm talking about. Even so, this video is still going to be pretty dark and pretty disturbing, so get a snack, get a comfort drink, and buckle up. We're going to talk about 3 different Russian roulette stories today where the people who played it did not survive. Let's talk first about a little bit of history of Russian roulette, though. If you don't know what Russian roulette is, I doubt you don't. Most people know what it is, but it's a game of chance with lethal consequences. It's a game where you take a revolver, typically with a cylinder that can hold 6 bullets. Typically, you play it with a group of people. You put 1 bullet in the gun, you spin the cylinder, and close it at random so nobody knows where the bullet is in the gun. Typically, then the game is played by people putting this weapon to themselves up here and pulling the trigger. It's a game of chance with extremely high stakes because if you lose, you're done forever. The game can be played 2 different ways. Either you put 1 bullet in You spin the cylinder and close it between each round. That means that everybody's odds of the worst happening go back to 1 in 6, about 16.7%, I think it is, every single time. This is definitely the less risky way, if you want to put it that way, to play, because everybody's odds are the same every round. However, there's an alternative way to play where you don't spin the cylinder between each round, guaranteeing that at some point, if you keep playing, the gun will go off. And every single round that is played, the next person that plays has a higher and higher chance of losing. Spoilers for Squid Game Season 2 coming right now. Skip to this timestamp if you haven't seen the season yet. I'll wait. Okay, if you've seen it, then watch this part. There is a great scene towards the beginning of season 2 of Squid Games where Ji-yoon and the salesman or the recruiter, the really hot guy, you know, who's really cruel, they play a game of Russian roulette together, and they play it where they don't spin the cylinder in between rounds. So they keep playing knowing that there is a 50-50 chance of them losing their life. It gets to the end of the game where Ji-yoon has pulled the trigger for the 5th time after they've been taking turns, and it doesn't go off, and Ji-yoon is spared. The recruiter then knows that the next round is going to kill him, but Ji-yoon says, hey, you could turn the gun on me if you want, but if you do that, you have to admit that you're nothing more than a dog for your bosses, the people who created Squid Games. The recruiter refuses to do so at any cost and ends up passing away right there in front of Ji-yoon. Okay, so we're going to talk about a brief history of the game, where it came from. Interestingly, nobody actually knows where this game came from. Nobody actually knows for sure the origins. It's believed that it could have been an adventure writer named George Surde, excuse my pronunciation, and he published a short fictional story for Collier's magazine back in 1937. In the story, a character says that they learned about the game while spending time with Russian soldiers in 1917. There was also a similar description of a Russian roulette-like game in the 1840 novel A Hero of Our Time by a Russian author, but it didn't explicitly call it Russian roulette, and the weapon in that story wasn't a revolver with 6 chambers. So in truth, nobody knows exactly where the origins of the game came from. I suspect that it was kind of a combination and a game of telephone, and it was a combination of this short story that was probably inspired from other things, and it just kind of evolved through the years. I have a hard time believing that the game is so new, only, less than 100 years old. I have a feeling that some sort of version of this has been played for hundreds of years, just as we know that early humans would literally fight to the death over things, that I kind of have a feeling that there was probably some sort of wager or high stakes game played for entertainment back when we were a little less civilized as we are now. Perhaps they just didn't have a name for it. Perhaps they didn't call it Russian roulette though. The first story that we're going to talk about today, FYI, this one is of a 16-year-old boy. So this one is just, they're all super tragic, but this one is extra heartbreaking. I'm just going to call him 16-year-old Ian. His full name is out there and everything, and it's not like it's protected information. It's pretty public, but since it wasn't readily available at every single article I looked at, I'm just going to keep his last name out of it just in case. Ian was only 16 years old, and he passed away playing this game by himself, but he was recording it for Snapchat. Ian was actually in middle school, so super young when he signed up for Instagram and Snapchat, unbeknownst to his mother. His mother didn't know. When she found out, she wasn't too concerned. She had a Facebook account, so she was like, well, Facebook seems to be pretty safe, and I would assume that these platforms where you can be 13 to sign up for at least Instagram, she just assumed that the platforms were safe for teens. Little did she know, though, Ian's algorithm was getting really dark. He apparently became actually addicted to the apps, especially Snapchat. But if you don't know how social media works, the algorithms on a lot of social media sites curate content to what you've already watched. So your YouTube history will affect what videos YouTube will recommend to you. The TikTok For You page, as you swipe, the more videos you watch to completion, TikTok takes a note of that and says, hey, you like that type of video, you'll probably like this type of video. Little did Ian's mom know, or anybody in his life really know, his algorithms were feeding him extremely dangerous content. Like I said, it was getting darker and darker, and it was starting to glorify dangerous acts. Apparently, his consumption of this content was making Ian depressed, anxious, even having outbursts, but it's a little bit confusing because mom claims that she saw absolutely no red flags, that his grades weren't suffering, and that he seemed happy. However, as we know, mental health can be very nuanced and people can be extremely depressed, and maybe he was having moments of outbursts, but mom just assumed it was a teenage thing. And for the most part, overall, he was doing great, and he was at least outwardly showing to his mom that he was fine. They found out later, though, that his algorithm was showing him not only dark content, but violent content and content that was glorifying violence and glorifying SH and the like. Very similar to how I feel like young girls, teenage girls, are very vulnerable to getting fed pro-Anna content online. Lots of glorification of EDs, as well as just toxic messages about bodies on their algorithms. Of course, both boys and girls can be fed any type of content, but just as kind of an analogy, it seems similar to that. Whereas when young boys click or they watch a certain thing, it just kind of, the algorithm just gets a little bit darker and darker every time. So Ian's algorithm was showing him dangerous, dark things that was encouraging and glorifying, and also minimizing the impact of extremely dangerous, adrenaline-focused games and activities. These videos also got a lot of attention on the platform, and since Ian was addicted to these social media apps, he also was really seeking the likes and the views and the attention and the shock that these types of videos brought, so he started doing them himself. Reportedly on August 13th, 2019, Ian passes away. His mother would later find on his phone 3 consecutive videos of him playing Russian roulette by himself in his room, but he was filming it and posting it to Snapchat. And 3 times in a row, these videos he posted were fine. Nothing happened. Ian was reportedly also resetting the cylinder between every round, resetting his odds between every video. But the 4th video of him doing this was never posted to social media. His odds reset, but he got unlucky, and you get it. You can fill in the blanks of what happened to Ian. Mom is understandably furious with Meta for feeding teenagers content like this, where teenagers may already be vulnerable. Teenagers already deal with a lot of mental health issues as they're growing into adults and growing into their bodies. And so mom was understandably furious that it was even possible that algorithms would feed him terrible, terrible things like that to exacerbate what he might already have been feeling. And then the message being sent to him over and over that it was okay to feel like this, and that it was even, heroic to feel like this, or, it was glorified, it was minimized. She is trying to file a wrongful death suit with Meta, but all I have to say is good luck with that. I hope she wins, but I just don't see Meta or other social media platforms being held accountable for these kind of things. I think it's too hard to prove in court that it was directly a result of Meta. I just have a feeling that these suits are going to be very, very tough to win. And I think Meta has a lot of money and a lot of lawyers too. So not only is that on their side, but they can also prove through loopholes that it wasn't a direct result of their platform, etc. Now, another elephant in the room about this story, though, that I couldn't find any information on. It is sparse to begin with, but I could not find any information or indication or even a hint about where Ian got the weapon. Why the hell did a 16-year-old child have a revolver in his room? Now, please reserve judgment on the mom or the parents and all that, because we just don't know the full story, and it's just not fair to judge if we don't. It's completely possible that he got this on a black market site, that he got this from a friend at school, that he had this somehow illegally and his parents didn't know. Maybe he had it hidden somewhere in his room for making these types of videos and they had no idea. We don't know, so it is not our place, and it's not fair to judge mom or anybody in Ian's life for that, because it's possible they had no idea. Don't get me wrong, fuck Meta. They're a terrible company, in my opinion. And I do agree that the algorithms curate dangerous content sometimes to people. I am also of the opinion that children should not be on social media. I think it's kind of ridiculous that you can be 13 and sign up for like Instagram. That's crazy. 13 is so young. You don't know your ass from your head at 13. It's crazy to give a 13-year-old a smartphone and let them go ham on places like Instagram and other social media. Those platforms mess with my mental health a lot. Can you imagine a vulnerable and not yet developed 13-year-old? I don't think children should be on any of these platforms. I think there should be a strict, you have to be 18 years or older to join any of them. TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, I don't care what it is. And while yes, these algorithms also definitely do this, and it's very disturbing, and I do agree that they are partially at fault for this, I still can't help but think about the fact that if he didn't have a revolver, this never would have happened. And how did a 16-year-old get a revolver? Okay, this next case is actually the one that inspired today's video, because I remember when this happened and I remember how shocked and horrified I was that this happened. And I also ask that you also reserve any judgment for the story and especially the victim until the end, because like many stories, this one is not all that it seemed, and there was actually more than what the news was presenting. So we're going to roll back to January 23rd of 2019 in St. Louis, Missouri. So we have 29-year-old Nathaniel Hendren. He was a former Marine and was about 1 year into being a police officer. Our victim in this story is 24-year-old Caitlyn Alex. She was also in the military and also not even 2 years into being a police officer at this point. She had actually already been married for several months when this happened, but allegedly her and Nathaniel were in a relationship. Allegedly, they were having an affair. And according to Nathaniel, he was in love with Caitlyn and they even had plans to move in together. Many of the reports omit this information completely, but a lot of them do include it. So it's very confusing. But if I know anything about people, it's that if there's possibly an affair going on, it's probably going on. So here's the timeline of events. Earlier that night, January 23rd, 2019, evening time, Caitlyn texts Nathaniel and says, "I'm going to come bring you cold medicine." She brought this to Nathaniel's apartment. They both stayed there for a while and had dinner together, and they were also allegedly drinking, even though Nathaniel had a shift at the police station starting at 11 p.m. Caitlyn eventually goes home and Nathaniel leaves for his shift. He starts a little before 11 p.m. that night. After getting to work, he clocks on, meets up with his police partner, Patrick Reardon, and literally minutes after the men clock in, they're goofing off. Pretty much immediately after clocking in, they text Caitlyn and say that they could really use a, quote, beginning of work smoke. Important to the story, Caitlyn was not working that night. She was completely off duty. The reports say that Nate and Patrick responded to a call about an assault, but it was pretty quickly resolved. Then Nate and Patrick, again patrolling in their little police car, get a notification about a tripped alarm system that they're supposed to go check out. But they don't. Instead, they ask a fellow officer if they could go check this tripped alarm report. They would get a text from that officer saying, "WTF, dude, what's so important that you can't take care of this call?" Nate and Patrick eventually marked this call as a false alarm, even though as far as I know, they never went to go check it out, which love that for us. Love that our officers of the law are taking it seriously and are really concerned about, their number one duty, which is protecting the people of their city. Instead, Nate and Patrick go back to Nate's apartment. They allegedly messed with the GPS system, or either messed with it or didn't log on. They did something so that nobody could track where they were and figure out that they weren't patrolling. Caitlyn went to Nate's apartment as well. She was already there when Nate and Patrick arrived, and the three of them were all in Nate's apartment by midnight, which again is crazy that they are police officers and literally are not doing their job at all. So we have Nate and Patrick, the ones that are working, and then we have Caitlyn. All three of them are at Nate's apartment. Everyone that night was again allegedly drinking more and allegedly doing drugs. We don't know what kind of drugs though, or how much. So allegedly they're all intoxicated, and at one point Nate and Caitlyn, remember the two that are supposedly in a romantic relationship, start playing Russian roulette. This is a little bit before 1 a.m. According to reports, Nate puts a bullet in a revolver that he owned personally, not his police weapon, but a revolver from his home, a personal weapon. He put one bullet in it, spins the cylinder and closes it, allegedly points it at Caitlyn's chest and pulls the trigger, and nothing happens. As far as I understand, they were not spinning the cylinder in between turns. So Caitlyn then takes it, points it at Nate, and then pulls the trigger. And again, nothing happens. Remember, Nate claims that he is in love with this woman. He claims that he is in love with Caitlyn and wants to move in with her. And he's playing Russian roulette. Now, another extremely important part about this story that, again, I feel like is often not left out, but kind of brushed over, is that, remember, Nate's in uniform. So Nate is wearing a bulletproof fucking vest. Caitlyn is not in uniform, so she's not. So he straight up pointed a gun at allegedly his girlfriend who he's in love with, and pulled the trigger, not knowing if it would go off. And then she pulled the trigger back at him, but he was always safe and she wasn't. So they're also, like I said, not spinning the cylinder between rounds, so the odds are getting worse and worse. After Caitlyn has her turn and points it at Nate and it doesn't go off, Nate takes it back, points it back at Caitlyn at her chest, and the gun goes off. Caitlyn is shot right through the chest, and they, of course, freak out. Which, of course, they panic, but honestly, it's like, what did you think was gonna happen? So then, according to Patrick, he was actually about to leave at this point. He was on his way out the door. He had told Nate and Caitlyn that they shouldn't be playing with a gun. He was allegedly walking out the door, so didn't even see this actually happen, which to me, again, I have no proof of this. This is only from the news articles, the information, the public information I could find, but that seems very, very fishy to me. I do not personally, in my opinion, believe that Patrick was completely not involved and completely was like, no guys, don't do that. That's so dangerous. I think that this was a story that Patrick and Nate came up with afterwards because Nate knew that he was in big trouble, but was trying to be a bro's bro and didn't want to get his buddy in trouble. So I personally believe, based on what I know, my personal opinion is that they made up that story to try to get Patrick out of trouble. I don't think Patrick was involved in the actual shooting part, but I highly doubt that he was protesting. I have a feeling that he was kind of just sitting there being a bystander and they didn't want him to look that bad. And it worked because Patrick in the end was put on leave while they were investigating, of course, but then he got to be a police officer again. He has since left the force, and I found from his LinkedIn that he's now working in IT, which is, he left being a police officer completely. Very interesting. That's a side quest though. Let's get back to the main story. So after Caitlyn is struck, Nate and Patrick say that Patrick rushed down to their patrol car and started the car while Nate was right behind him with Caitlyn in his arms. And he was carrying Caitlyn to the car, got her in the car, and they rushed her to the hospital. But it was too late. Caitlyn passed away. There's some people that question why they didn't call an ambulance. And I don't know the ins and outs of police work, obviously. But to me, this part of the story anyway, does make sense because they could get her in the police car. Whereas instead of waiting for an ambulance, they could get her in the car and turn their lights on so that they could rush to the hospital probably faster than an ambulance could. So that part makes sense to me, at least. So Nate eventually takes a plea deal, and in February of 2020, both the prosecution and the defense agree that Nate should be sentenced to 7 years in prison. He ended up pleading guilty to involuntary manslaughter. But of course, Nate got paroled, and he didn't even have to serve 4 years of his sentence before he was out. So he's a free man now. So remember how at the beginning I said reserve your judgment because there's more to this story that meets the eye? Well, that's where this part comes in, because it's possible that they weren't playing Russian roulette at all. Caitlyn's mother has been pursuing legal action against Nate for wrongful death civil suits, stuff like that. Unfortunately, Nate has filed for bankruptcy and she can't get any money out of him. But in all the legal action that was taken, Caitlyn's family side of the story has come to light some very different things. Caitlyn's family claims that the stories that came out, the whole Russian roulette story that made the news, was actually the police department's story. / it might have been Patrick and Nate's story that they told the police station, and therefore it's all from the police station, the police department's point of view, to make them look as good and as least guilty as possible. Allegedly, according to Caitlyn's family, Nate has a history of severe anxiety, depression, and PTSD. PTSD most likely from being in the Marines. He has shown troubling behavior in the past, including, completely allegedly, that he has made other girlfriends in the past play Russian roulette with him as well, or similar gunplay games. Their lawsuit alleged that the night that this happened, neighbors could hear screaming from Nate's apartment. That the night this happened, before Caitlyn passes away, neighbors claim that they heard a man and a woman fighting badly, yelling at each other. They allege that it's possible Nate just put this bullet in his gun and straight up shot Caitlyn. And if that's not the case, he was either forcing or coercing her into playing Russian roulette. That the whole story the police department put out was to, again, paint Nate and therefore the police department in a better light. It's also way easier for the public to blame this whole thing on Caitlyn then, because if they were both consenting adults playing Russian roulette, we could just say, play stupid games, win stupid prizes, right? My very personal opinion, based on what I know, and based on what I know about true crime, just statistically, it is more likely that a young man, especially between the ages of like 18 and 30, are possibly going to be violent towards partners, and there's going to be a DV situation. Just statistically speaking, that is more likely than the story that the police department put out. And I just think that the mere fact that he was reportedly wearing a bulletproof vest proves this. The odds were in his favor from the beginning, so even if they were deciding to play Russian roulette together, it doesn't make any sense because it was never an equal playing field to begin with. That mere fact makes this whole thing seem weird to me, because who would agree to play that game with somebody who was wearing a bulletproof vest? That's like two people being pushed out of an airplane, except one of them has a parachute and the other one doesn't, and then we all blame the one who doesn't have a parachute for dying when they were pushed. So I don't know. This whole thing just seems fishy to me. The St. Louis Police Department also has a history for being problematic and being corrupt. And so I'm just saying the alternative story to this would not surprise me whatsoever. I just have a hard time believing that Caitlyn was like, yeah, let's play that, when the other person playing with her had a bulletproof vest on. It sounds way more like she was either forced, heavily coerced, or they weren't playing that game at all. That this was strictly a DV partner violence situation, and they made up the Russian roulette story after the fact. So our last Russian roulette story today is about the magician illusionist from Finland named Imo Laikas. Imo was born on May 12th, 1947, and by the time he was a teenager, he was already interested in performing. He was known for really pushing the boundaries and doing very seemingly dangerous acts to stay ahead of the competition. Apparently, the competition was really, really rough for street performers and circus performers at this time, because with the rise of television in the 1960s, it was really hard to get an edge above other entertainment. He was famous for tricks like walking on broken glass, eating, swallowing shards of glass. He also liked to do tricks where it appears like he's in serious mortal danger. So he had a guillotine trick. He also had a very, very realistic looking hanging stunt. He was so good at this hanging stunt that he was hired as a stunt double for the 1973 Finnish movie called The Earth is a Sinful Song. And a character in that movie does that at the end of the movie as a way to, end themselves. And so they used Imo as a stunt double for that scene because he was so good at this trick, and they show the whole thing in the movie. I went to go just watch that scene because it's all in Finnish and it's super realistic. He was also really famous for performing hypnosis on his audience members, but Imo had to stop this in 1975 after he did it on a 10-year-old girl who was so well hypnotized that she had to be hospitalized because when they were trying to snap her out of it, she wouldn't return to normal. I don't really know what that means, but that's what the reports say. However, one of Imo's most shocking and popular acts was his version of Russian roulette. He would do his own little version of this trick by having a box of blanks and of real bullets, and they were supposedly indistinguishable from each other. Neither of them were marked, and they looked exactly the same. So he would either mix them up and load the gun with them, or he would have an audience member mix them up and load the gun with them. The performance then is him being able to know or predict which bullet next in the gun was either a blank or a real bullet. So when he said that he used telepathy, that he literally had telepathy skills and he could tell. So if it was a real bullet, he would aim it at a target and shoot the target. But then the next one, if he knew that it was a blank, he would point it at his, And to be clear, just because it was a blank, don't do that. He was specially trained in doing this, but that can still be dangerous even if nothing actually comes out of the gun. Anyway, he was doing this act for over a year. He had done it literally hundreds of times. One report I saw said that he had done this at least 200 times without incident. When, as far as we understand, this was a real trick that he had telepathy to know which was which. But then in September of 1976, at the age of 29, Imos's luck and telepathy skills ran out. He was doing this act for an audience and he thought that the next round was a blank. He pointed it at and he shot, and it was not a blank. Everyone actually thought that this was part of the performance at first. Everybody at first didn't even move because they thought that he was just pretending, that he was just acting for entertainment purposes. But it obviously became clear very quickly that it was not part of the act and that this was very real. And the audience, of course, panics and runs away. I have searched high and low, you guys, trying to figure out how the hell he did this trick, because it matters, right? Like, surely he had some way of knowing which was which, because the odds of doing this, not only like shooting it hundreds of times, but doing the whole round hundreds of times and nothing happening, is just statistically so unlikely. And we also know that telepathy is not a real thing. I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but nobody actually has telepathic skills. If they claim they do, they're trying to get attention on social media. Other magicians have done a similar trick, and it's successful because they're usually able to give the illusion that the gun is loaded with one single bullet, but it's not at all. Typically, they're able to make it look like they're loading it, and then they can palm the bullet, or there's some other magic behind the scenes trick where the magician is never in any danger. But it seemed like with Imos, he was always in danger. So my personal opinion is that there was some other trick that we didn't know about, where he did know which ones were the blanks and which ones were the bullets somehow. Somehow he had some other trick up his sleeve, and he just claimed that it was telepathy. I think that most likely that is what happened, and then there was a mistake. And then he made an error, he calculated wrong, one of the bullets was put in a different place that wasn't where it wasn't supposed to be. Something went awry, and that is how tragedy struck. Because the other alternative is that he literally just got so unbelievably lucky all this time. We still don't know the full details. Like I said, I've looked high and low. I have found little news articles from a newspaper from that actual time reporting on this, and it does not say anything about how this actually happened. So this is a really interesting Russian roulette death because there's still an air of mystery to it to this day, which is funny given that it was a magician / illusionist to do this. If you guys are interested in any of the merch, that is all listed down below. We have Future Ghost, we've got a Future Poltergeist, we have the Peking Ghost down there, and we still have Camping Cryptids down there, always for sale as well. Check out my Patreon if you want extras, exclusive videos. I am actually working on a special iceberg series just for the Patreon, and it is one that I could not play on mainstream YouTube at all. Like, I won't even try because it's about adult things. So we're working on that. That's going to be a multiple part series on the Patreon channel that if you sign up for the mid-tier or higher, you get that. And there's lots of other perks on there. We do a lot of fun polls over there as well. We do Netflix parties. There's early access at least a couple times a month. And yeah, we also have a second channel. If you want more of me on that second channel, I just read scary stories. I just read personal scary stories that people have sent in to me. So we have a lot of fun over there as well. Speaking of Patreons, thank you guys so much for the extra support. Thank you to all the patrons on the screen right now. I appreciate you all so much, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Okay, bye.
Från livets grottekvarn. Bullfest, bullfest hela dagen.